Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of Babergh District Council Cabinet. I'm Councillor John Ward, leader of Babergh District Council, and I'll be chairing this meeting today. Before the commencement of the meeting, I'd like to pay tribute to Councillor David Busby, who passed away on Sunday, the 27th of July. Dave was the serving councillor for Copdock and Washbrook, a position he has held since first elected in 2003. During this time, he was appointed as Cabinet Member for Assets and Investments, as well as Cabinet Member for Planning, a position that he stepped away from after being diagnosed with his illness. Dave served the council and his ward with dedication and distinction, and he will be missed by all in this chamber. I do have a few other words, actually, I just wanted to add to that, to be honest. He was a councillor for many years. For most of that time, he was a backbencher, one of a select few of only 3 Lib Dems at times. But his contributions were always, well, usually insightful, sometimes witty, occasionally acerbic, but always useful and welcomed by everyone. And I was pleased to be able to bring him into the Coalition Cabinet in 2019. He threw himself into the role and was an effective member, and also an effective director and chair of our holding company. And you've got to remember, Dave also had 2 briefer periods as leader in 2023, and he had to stand down, unfortunately, due to illness. But it wasn't always in the council chamber that Dave was fun. In the pub, after the meetings, it was always good to chat to him about his analysis of the meeting, and also for his sporting passions of Formula 1, cricket and golf. So, Dave Busby, good councillor and a great bloke. So, back to the script. To remember Dave, please can I ask members to stand for a minute's silence. Thank you. May I now remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use, that you do not interrupt other speakers, that if you are attending the meeting or speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. Additionally, we will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov app. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you'll be deemed by the council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. If you are intending to do so, please could you inform the committee clerk. I'll now move to the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence.
None received, Chair.
Item 2, to receive declarations of pecuniary, other registrable or non-registrable interest by members. Are there any to declare? No? Great. And item 3, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of July. So if I take you through those minutes, we're starting on page 5 of your agenda pack, page 6, page 7, page 8, and page 9. So if there are no comments on the minutes, then may I have a proposer, please? Councillor Saw, and a seconder. Councillor Helen Davis. Right, the governance officer will now conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress.
Excellent.
Thank you, Chair. That is 7 votes for and 1 abstention, so that's carried.
Thank you. Right. Item 4, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 5, questions by councillors.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. And item 6, matters referred by the Overview and Scrutiny or Joint Audit and Standards Committees.
There are no matters referred, Chair.
Thank you. Item 7, forthcoming decisions list. Members of the Cabinet, are there any comments? I just have one, and that is the council agenda for September doesn't yet include the case for change for the local government reorganisation. Okay. So apart from that, thank you. Forthcoming decisions list has been noted. Item 8 is paper BCA 2511, creation of temporary accommodation portfolio. And I'd like to, we do have our Director for Property Development and Regeneration, Emily Atack here, also Director of Housing, Deborah Fenton, and the Head of Housing, Andrew Yeboah. But I have to note this report contains confidential appendices. If members wish to ask questions on the appendices, we will have to go into closed session. But I'd like to invite the Cabinet Member for Housing to introduce the report. Councillor Hendry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to be bringing this paper to Cabinet today. This report sets out a proposal to increase the provision of temporary housing across the district and to reduce reliance on bed and breakfast and hotel accommodation for this purpose. Despite our continued success at preventing homelessness, consistently achieving above average prevention figures, and our very successful partnership with Central Suffolk Lettings, helping many to find private rentals, the demand continues to grow. Not only does placement in bed and breakfast or hotels make no financial sense, the impact it can have on families whose lives are already in turmoil is unmeasurable. Having to move into temporary housing is daunting enough, but being placed into bed and breakfast is even more so. There is no sense of home. Placements are often far away from friends, families, jobs and schools, and I'm sure we've all worked with residents who have experienced this. I would like to request members support option 3 to develop a portfolio of suitable properties specifically for temporary accommodation within the General Fund. I would also like to point out an error in recommendation 3.2. This relates only to Mid Suffolk, so could I please request its removal? And also paragraph 4.1 reference says Mid Suffolk and it should be Babergh. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hendry. I should have noted that Deborah Fenton is available via Teams rather than present in the chamber. So may I have a proposer, please? Councillor Saw. Oh, sorry, that's a seconder, because we've got a proposer. Seconder. Councillor Saw. Yeah. Right, okay. So questions from members. Does anyone have any questions at this stage? Councillor Derek Davis and then Councillor Sally Davis.
I commend the paper, it's very good, and obviously we need to address this issue. The question I have, and it's a bit of an overarching question really in regard to all our policies now, is what due regard was given to the Armed Forces Covenant, in particular the Armed Forces community, in terms of the wider aspect of this, because as you'll be aware, we are now legally obliged within the 3 threads of the current legislation to make sure that due regard is given to all policy decisions, which this is going to be, within housing, education and social and healthcare being the 3 provisions at the moment. There's no mention of this in the paper. Perhaps it's an oversight, I'd rather that we show that we did have due regard for the armed forces community during the decision-making process. Thank you.
Councillor Henry, would you like to answer?
Thank you, Councillor Davis. I do understand your concerns. I am very confident that the Housing Department are aware of our commitment to the Covenant, and I've seen this in practice many times. But with regards to this particular report, I'd like to pass you over to the officers and hopefully they can answer your question. Thank you.
Well, Councillor Davis, we did an equality impact assessment, and part of creating the portfolio is we'll be getting hopefully more self-contained units, and one of the things we hope to do when we are approached by veterans is we like to place them, if we've got the available accommodation, in self-contained accommodation, because I think that takes into account their needs and their requirements. So hopefully there'll be a benefit from this rather than suffering any loss.
That's fantastic, and thank you very much for that. My only concern is that there's nothing in the paper that shows that we have taken due regard. I fully accept that you probably have, and the work that you've carried out. But I think it's important, not just for this paper, but for all policy papers going forward, that we've shown that we've given due regard to the Armed Forces Covenant, which we're signed up to and hoping to make even stronger. But particularly in housing, it's part of the legislation now, and it's going to get even stronger within 2 years. We may not be here, but for all our policy decisions. So I would like to see within this paper a paragraph showing that we have, as you say, shown due regard, and that it is made obvious and clear. Thank you.
Emma, is this, excuse me, is this the paper the right vehicle for that, or
Then, if it was about the allocation of temporary accommodation, then we would have some lines about the due regards to that. The allocations policy speaks to the veterans and what we will do for them, and I think we're not talking here of how we're going to allocate to them. This is more about acquiring properties into a portfolio. If it was about the allocation of temporary accommodation, then I think that would be appropriate. But this is about the acquisition of properties.
I take your point, but it's a policy decision, and by legal requirement, we're meant to show that we've shown due regard to that. And I appreciate what you're saying. It's not about the allocation, but it's about us. And we need to show that we've taken the consideration, the Armed Forces Covenant within that, and how it will affect, and it will be a positive thing, I've got no doubt, the Armed Forces community. And I think it's not just, obviously in housing at the moment, and other housing papers coming forward, we need to be more aware of our commitment and the legislation on that. So I'd still like to see something in that.
I take your point, Councillor Davis. I'm struggling to see where we could put in such a statement and how it would relate to the content and the purpose of this paper. As Anna said, this is about property acquisition rather than allocations. So I think that everything we've done up until now shows our commitment to the Armed Forces Covenant, and we will always ensure that our veterans are treated fairly under the Covenant when it comes to things like housing allocations. But this is how we go about buying and building up a temporary accommodation portfolio within the general fund.
I appreciate that. What I'm saying is that we still need to show we've given due regard to the Armed Forces Covenant within this policy decision.
Okay. There are a number of other councillors who've got their hands up. Maybe one or two of them have got suggestions along these, but I just want to... So can I go, before I come back to you, can I go to other members first? So I've got Sally Davis and Helen Davis, and then Deborah Saul, Councillor Saul, and then Councillor Smith. Right, that's pretty much everyone, except for Councillor McCraw. He usually has his hand up. Sally, over to you.
I've got two questions, if that's all right. The first one, I just want to be clear about the funding for the acquisition of these properties, because at one point we talk about transferring money from the HRA into the general fund, and then we're going to get over £1 million from the local authority housing fund, and then there is a mention about funding the borrowing, which will be covered by rents. Can I just be absolutely clear how we propose to fund these acquisitions? Thanks.
I think we looked at our financial position in Babergh, and we have secured local authority housing funding to do the first aspect of it, and in the spending review there is actually scope for more funding to become available through the local housing authority fund for temporary accommodation, so we will be making bids for that. So that is the actual plan of how we'll be funding it.
So what's the cost of borrowing then? What are we borrowing?
I don't believe we will be borrowing anything towards the acquisition of these units.
Oh, because at one point it says that rental income will be covering the cost of borrowing.
Thank you. So I think it's paragraph 6.3. So that's looking at viability. So when we look at viability, we're looking at the net present value of a scheme. And so we do normally put some assumed borrowing costs in there as well. So it's more about affordability and viability in terms of how we assess each of the individual opportunities to make sure we're paying an appropriate amount for the opportunity rather than it being an actual borrowing cost. So apologies if that wasn't clear.
Thank you for that. My second question is at 8.1, there's only one risk factor. And that one is reputational risk. Is that really the only risk factor we have in this policy?
Thank you. So I think we're looking at the risks in relation to the acquisition of these units. So we're not looking at the risks in terms of running those units in due course. Those risks will be covered by operational risk registers as we move forward. So that's probably why we see fewer risks in relation to this report, because it is based on acquiring the new fund rather than the challenges that we may or may not have operating these units in due course. I'm sure Emma's team could share operational risk registers in relation to running those facilities in due course.
Helen Davis.
Thank you. Again, a couple of questions and a follow-up to Councillor Derek Davis's point. You're saying you're getting the portfolio of properties from developers, Section 106 units. Will those be units that will be built to affordable home standard, or will they just be regular Taylor Wimpey type homes?
I think it will be both potentially, because we're looking to acquire the best units in the best locality as well. Because I think for us, locality is quite key, because we're trying to ensure that we're able to cover the breadth of the district and having temporary accommodation units within communities so that people have not been placed too far away. So we're quite open to whether it's Section 106 or open market.
Okay, and a follow-up question. Under tenure, you've got leasehold in there, short and long term. And given the dire press leaseholders had over the past few years, is that a good option?
Thank you. So I think it's important that we have a range of opportunities, both freehold and leasehold. Like many things, it's about the details of those circumstances. So there have been lots of changes around leasehold rules and regs in any event, so that there are no longer ground rents charged, etc., and managing the issues that have been raised from some historic properties. Those are all factors we would take into account when assessing the suitability of a property so that we could decide whether in that particular circumstance, in that location, if there was a locality, if there were any leasehold properties available, we wouldn't necessarily rule it out just on the grounds of it being leasehold. It would be looking at the balance of whether it provides the right accommodation in the right location and that there are appropriate mitigations in place around any leasehold property that we should need to take on.
Okay. And sorry, yet another question, and it's following up on from Councillor Sally Davis's point about finances. Will you be coming back to us later, let's assume this all gets off the ground, with some financial modelling around the initial funding, the amount you're borrowing, the rate of interest, the cost of maintaining all these properties, so we get a clear picture of the financial aspects of it, especially given as we've really only got, sadly, a couple of years left of Babergh being Babergh.
So the intention isn't to borrow, it is to use the third-party funding. I'm sure we can report back to Cabinet the progress in terms of the spend rate and also provide any impact in terms of our operational costs around temporary housing in the normal way as part of our budget process. In reality, we currently have that financial burden at the moment, but we're using, say, bed and breakfast accommodation instead of our own properties. So we can certainly review the situation as we move forward to see whether we are actually delivering not just better accommodation, but also some financial savings in terms of taking this approach.
Thank you. And just one final point, with respect to Councillor Derek Davis's comments around veterans, you could just add a small bullet point under item 6, safeguarding and suitability for vulnerable groups, just adding in a line about, acknowledging our commitment to veterans under whatever the legislation is.
Sorry, where was that, Councillor?
Part 6, it's on page 12, safeguarding and suitability for vulnerable groups, acknowledging our commitment to armed forces veterans.
In the selection criteria, yeah.
I don't know the detail of exactly what the act is called and the point.
Thank you.
I'll stop talking now.
Right, Councillor Saw and then Councillor Smith.
Yes, I would like to ask, have we had any exploratory discussions with developers as regards the selection of these properties? I do note that we have a registered providers forum with social housing companies, and over the past few months we have, or in fact longer than that, we have had difficulties finding social housing companies to take our Section 106s on. So I would be interested to know how, what discussions we've had, and also how long do you think it will take us to get 30 homes, or are we doing it on a phased basis? Thank you.
Thank you. So we are in dialogue with developers on an ongoing basis, looking at schemes they're bringing forward to the district. So if this policy is agreed, then we will develop those discussions further in terms of this particular use. In terms of a timescale, it will be a phased approach. We're not anticipating being in a position where we can acquire 30 units next week or whenever. It will be phased. It will be based on our needs across the district, and also when those opportunities come up in the appropriate locations where there is a need. Have I covered all elements of your question?
Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Sort of following on from that and from the finances, the money that's being the council secured from the local authority housing fund, how many of the 30 units do you think that might secure?
So probably in the region of 5 or 6 units at this point in time.
Thank you. Could I have another question, Chair? Yeah. It's a great idea and I fully support it. I wondered if it's been considered before, and if not, why not?
I think I can probably take this question. I haven't been involved in the housing portfolio perhaps as long as others, but certainly I'm aware that in the past we have looked at different ways of providing temporary accommodation, and we have used homes within our existing HRA and other opportunities as they come forward. But as our, I suppose, portfolio matures, we do need to look at other options for how we can continue to meet the growing need. I think particularly with homelessness, we have seen that this need is growing and growing quite quickly. It isn't a sort of gradual increase. You know, the papers are showing that we are seeing kind of a significant increase in need. And so now is an appropriate time to take a probably a more proactive approach towards that growing need.
I've got Councillor McCraw and then Councillor Saw again.
So if I read the papers correctly, under the options considered, option 1 suggests, and I mean there are reasons why you would consider something like this. The first one is it's costing a lot of money. And I think option 1, 2.1, refers to the increasing, it uses the word spiralling costs. And we've seen a lot of spiralling costs in recent years. Is it the case that that has actually made this more viable than perhaps it would have been in the past? It seems to me a good idea. Is that the case? That it's now viable because of these spiralling costs?
I think what we're trying to do is, the provision of temporary accommodation is a general fund activity, and what we're trying to do is realign where our portfolio of properties sit, and it makes more sense for it to sit within the general fund for temporary accommodation because it allows us to make sure that it continues to be sustainable and as cost neutral as we can make it, because it's one of those things that with the increasing demand we're always going to have to provide some level of temporary accommodation, but making sure that we have a portfolio that's fit for purpose and also is sustainable cost-wise going forward is what we're looking to do. And you're right, and now is a good time to be doing it. It's the right time to be doing it as well.
Thank you. May I follow on with that? Because it seems to me that we were talking about temporary accommodation, and the whole point of temporary is it's been bed and breakfast and so on. In this instance, we're talking about permanent buildings with temporary accommodation within them, and how are we going to run the system that makes sure that those don't necessarily become permanent because they are for a purpose. We are hoping for people in temporary accommodation to find more permanent housing, either with us or outside us, but we're not necessarily. So I'm just wondering, how will we practically run that move from our permanent temporary accommodation to the final housing solution? I wonder if there's any thought on that.
We've got resettlement officers as part of the temporary accommodation team. They work with the residents that are in temporary accommodation to help them move on. I think the average stay in temporary accommodation for us is no more than 6 months. So we really do look to try and make it as a short stay as possible. So the team are constantly, someone comes in, they get an assessment done, what do you need to move on, help them to bid if they need to bid, and looking at move on plans for them. So the minute you enter, the view of the team is to look for when you exit. So there is no plan for anyone to stay long term.
During that period, there would presumably be a more home-like feel than you could possibly ever get in bed and breakfast. This is a human solution. It is not one designed to make people feel other or different. I applaud the approach.
Councillor Saw and then Councillor Sally Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I note in the paper that the need rose by 69% between 2021 and 24-25. Have you done any modelling as what you see the growth, unfortunately, in and need in temporary accommodation going forward?
That's currently being worked on at the moment as we speak.
But the 30 homes take into account that this is at the moment your best estimate?
Exactly.
Right. May I have another question, Chair? I note that in the criteria, you say community impact, low likelihood of negative community impact. Could you explain what you mean by that, and what are the implications for that for the type of home or the location that you're looking for?
That's when we mentioned that we're making sure that we're looking at, when we look at those areas, is this an area where you have issues around ASB? Is there anything else that we need to be knowing so that we don't add to that discourse? So for us, it's being sensitive to the needs of that community as well, so that we do not add to that stressor. So it's about looking at risk assessing that situation. So when you're looking at that locality, what other things are happening there that we need to be aware of? Because equally, these are also vulnerable households, and do you want to be placing people in situations that might be quite contentious?
Councillor Sally Davis.
Yeah, I just, again, want to be clear about the money. So this is government money, the Local Authority Housing Fund, which is for this purpose, but we're only going to get 5 or 6 homes out of that. We've got some HRA funds as well, but do we expect to get more, but by the year, from the Local Authority Housing Fund? How are we going to fund 30 homes?
It was mentioned in the spending review that there will be more money from the Local Authority Housing Fund to acquire temporary accommodation. The details of that have not been shared just yet, and as that comes out, we'll be looking to what that detail is and making bids as required.
And how many do we think we're going to get out of the HRA, the transfer from the HRA funds?
That will depend on a number of factors of the types of property that become available. So I think that's something that we would have to assess and see what the benefit of that was and how viable it was to do.
We would still have to buy them from the HRA, though. I just want to ask Deborah Fenton if perhaps she would like to make any comment over the questions that have been asked, particularly around the funding. The issue of the number of houses, the amount of money we've got from the government so far, it would seem for 30 houses we're going to need anything between 7, 8 to 10 million pounds. So my question is, I think we have to assume there is going to be a level of borrowing, and that is principally what Section 6 of the report is alluding to, in terms of making sure that the rental income allows us to finance that borrowing and not impose a burden on the general fund. So is that a fair assumption, Deborah? Do you have anything else that you perhaps want to say about that, or any of the other questions?
So thank you. So I think in terms of borrowing, there is no there's no aspiration to borrow in Babergh at the moment. So we do hope to have further funding from government. If I can just pick up the question about HRA. So the properties which are being that have been transferred from the HRA to the general fund, there will be a transfer of debt for that. So what happens is, and so this is actually being done in mid. So the properties will be transferred, and the relevant debt, which links back to the 2012 self-financing regime, so the loans we had to get from councils, will be attributed to that, and then it's the level of debt which so it's a I suppose it's a payment to cover the debt that gets put back into the HRA. So what doesn't happen is the HRA sells those properties to the general fund at sort of current market value. So that's not how it works. The other thing to point out is Mid Suffolk have also had a paper, and members will be aware that Mid Suffolk has got some reserves, and Mid Suffolk have committed to putting in £2 million to fund temporary accommodation in Mid Suffolk. So it's very much, our thought that we will work together. So Mid Suffolk and Babergh would work together. So if I can give you an example there, so we can look at the properties across Babergh and Mid Suffolk, and say for example we had a property which was in Mid Suffolk, and it was appropriate for a family to be placed there, and it won't always be the case, of course, but it's appropriate when you compare it to hotel or B&B accommodation, that we could potentially do that and then charge Babergh for that. So it's really good practice the way this has been approached, because it means we can work together across both districts to end the use of B&B or hotel accommodation. And that also mitigates our risk as well. So, for example, we might have situations where, we might in the future, and let's hope, although I don't think it will be the case, that the numbers of homelessness in, say, Mid Suffolk may reduce, but in Babergh, for whatever reason, they increase. And by working together, it helps us mitigate the risk of having voids, which are specifically for temporary accommodation, which we then can't fill, which has happened in other councils. So I'm not sure if I've made it more complicated or answered any questions.
No, thanks, Deborah. You've clarified the transfer from HRA to general fund. That makes sense. Just one follow-up on that. Do you envisage that being a permanent transfer, or something that might, or property that might go back to the HRA again, knowing that obviously we don't have spare properties within the HRA, that we have a waiting list. So the last thing we want to do is to transfer too many properties to the general fund, albeit for a valid and justifiable reason.
So when we're looking at our assets in the HRA, we look at a number of options. The assets that are being transferred from the HRA to the general fund are assets which are no longer useful to the HRA. So to give you an example, it might be, a building which has been used as a hostel, which doesn't lend itself to be refurbished for permanent housing. So in that respect, we're not transferring properties to the general fund which have a useful purpose in our current housing stock. And it's also, extending that slightly, worth pointing out that any properties that we dispose of in the HRA, we use the receipts to invest in new permanent housing.
Thank you, Deborah. Thanks. Members of the Cabinet, if there are no further questions, before we go into...
I've got one question which has just come from
okay.
Deborah's response, which was very good. I've just got a slight concern, and I'm just going through the paper to see if this has been taken into consideration. Because we're making this proactive and positive move, is there a danger that other councils or other people will come to Babergh Mid Suffolk because we've got more availability? Consideration.
Can you answer that?
we do take that into consideration, but based on what we know from the data that we hold, most people come from within our districts that we support and help. So very few come from outside that usually have some sort of link, or unless they're feeling some sort of violence or domestic abuse. So we do not anticipate this being a pull factor for people coming to us. So we're not concerned about that in that sense.
We have the confidential paper, which has got the selection criteria. We also have a summary of the selection criteria in the main body of the paper in section 2.3. There's more detail in the confidential appendix, and there's slight differences in some of the wording. But before I go to debate, does anyone wish to ask any questions on the selection criteria as stated in the confidential appendix? Good. Let's go to debate then. Does anyone wish to open the debate at this stage? Councillor McCraw.
You did say you expected me to speak. I think the only reasons you'd be considering a course of action like this is because, one, it's going to save money, and it is actually a financially viable thing to do. Two, it's the right thing to do because we are looking to be proactive in our housing solutions approach, and we're looking to act on a human level, a level I think I referred to already, that we want people to have places that they don't feel that they're unwelcome guests, that they can live even on a temporary basis and be treated decently in the process. The third reason would be that this should be sustainable. And sustainable in the way that we would be able to keep the temporary accommodation being used by multiple people, the people that are there in the future, while we find more permanent solutions for people in our district who have housing needs. Now, I have personally in my life been in the position of requiring, I've had housing needs, okay? And in a different market than this, I've experienced the fear of not having anywhere to live. The final thing that convinces me about this, and I'm happy with the financial bit we've got to deal with, it's always a little bit, we require the government money in the first place, and we're hoping there'll be more in the future. But I was impressed with one item in 414, in that it received praise from the Systems Change in Homelessness Services review by Shelter only last September, for prevention first ethos and frontline empowerment. And from personal experience with Shelter over the last 50 years, they're not easy to impress. They're not easy to receive praise from. It's usually the reverse. So I think that's the final clincher for me, because I think it meets all the tick boxes I'm looking for here. So I shall be supporting the paper, but I will be, keeping an eye on how we make this work and how we sustain it in the future. But I thank officers for the work that's been done.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Does anyone else wish to say anything? Councillor Davis, Derek Davis.
Sorry, I'm going to go back to the armed forces bit. I fully agree with what Councillor Helen Davies has said in terms of an additional, and now whether I need to make a request for an amendment, or if a paragraph can be added to 5.1 showing that due regard has been given to the Armed Forces Covenant, I'd be more than happy to accept that.
I think what members need to consider is that it's not just the contents of the paper, but also the content of the discussion, the questions and the debate that we're having, that shows that we have given due consideration to the Armed Forces Covenant, and that's a matter of public record, obviously, because this meeting is recorded. However, I think that if members of the Cabinet are in agreement, Councillor Helen Davis's suggestion of just adding something to item 6 in the criteria in paragraph 2.3. So if we just say property suitable for vulnerable clients and veterans. I don't know if that would be suitable, Councillor Davis, and also Councillor Hendry, obviously, from your perspective as the Cabinet member.
I think the key phrase is we have shown due regard. And it doesn't need to be any more than a sentence, but, and I take your point that we have discussed it and the officer has explained it very well. So just that one paragraph or even elongated sentence would suffice. But the phrase due regard has been shown is important.
So where would you want to see that in the report?
Yeah, 6.1 there or 5.1 within the paper. I don't mind.
So 5.1.
As an add-on to that paragraph, or as.
I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah. We could put another sentence.
Yeah.
On that, because as part of our plan for Babergh, if you're happy with that. Sorry, the Chief Executive would like to.
Just for clarification, so the report is the report. It's been published. You can't amend it because it is what it is. It's already there. You can amend the recommendations because clearly those are the things that you're being asked to approve or not approve. But you can't retrospectively amend something that's already been published. So either it's through the minutes of the debate that you've just had and so capture it in that way that you are assured as a Cabinet that the Armed Forces Covenant has had due regard, or by including it in the recommendation, or I think trying to do that might be more convoluted in trying to weave it in that way. So I think, as Chair referred to earlier, it's through the fact that you've had the debate that's recorded and that you perhaps specifically asked that it's recorded in the minutes that you have had due regard to and are satisfied that has been taken into account.
Okay, so can we ensure that in the minutes due regard to the Armed Forces Government? Thank you. Right, Councillor Hendry.
So can we also add to that I'd just like to assure Councillor Derek Davies that in future, bear in mind what you've said today and what you have brought up, we will bear that in mind with future reports, make sure that's included.
Right, if there are no further contributions to the debate, then I think we'll move to the vote now, if everyone's happy. So I'll now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That's 8 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you. Right, now we're moving on to item, this is item 10, it should be item 9. But, anyway, paper BCA 2512 to confirm the confidential minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of July. Does anyone have any points regarding the accuracy of those minutes? I just go to them myself. No? They seem very simple and straightforward. So in which case, may I have a proposer for those minutes, please? Councillor Saw and a seconder, Councillor Smith. So I'll now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That's 7 votes for and 1 abstention, so that's carried.
Great, thank you. So that concludes today's meeting. The next meeting is going to be on Tuesday, the 9th of September at 4 p.m. Thank you, everyone.